newsagents.
It's clear that taxes are going to have to rise. You're going to have to raise revenue, correct?
Look, I think that we will have to increase taxes in the budget, but
you're sticking to your. And let me and you're sticking to your commitment of no rises in national insurance, income tax, or VAT. That is the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, at the Treasury this afternoon with Emily and myself. And let there be no doubt, come October the 30th, there is going to be an announcement of tax rises.
So today we talk to Rachel Reeves about what those tax rises might be and about the choices that she has taken just 3.5 weeks into the job and whether she is falling into a trap of austerity. She also tells us about her new toilet. Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
And a little bit later on, we are going to be with Rachel Reeves in the Treasury for a sit-down interview on what has been the most extraordinary few days in her short tenure so far at the Treasury. Because if you thought the phrase liar, liar, pants on fire halfway up the telephone wire went with the general election campaign, forget it. They are both, her and the Shadow Chancellor, the ex-Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, are hurling abuse at one another over the state of the nation's finances.
Yeah, a war has broken out, and you will hear in some of the clips that we play the tone of absolute hurt and absolute righteous indignation from both the Chancellor and the former Chancellor. Now, Jeremy Hunt has, in the last 12 hours, written to the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, to ask him if civil servants covered up, lied, what they knew or what they told the now current Chancellor Rachel Reeves. And Rachel Reeves has said that Jeremy Hunt lied about the state of public finances. So 6 weeks in to this brand new dawn, this brand new look government, we are already finding something that feels pretty ugly and pretty seedy and pretty personal between the woman at the very top, the Chancellor, and the man who used to have her job. And we're going to ask about that, but also explain some of the moves that she made yesterday to, as she says, fill the £22 billion hole she never knew was there before the election.
Well, I think it's probably worth hearing a tiny bit of what happened in the Commons yesterday, because so much of what you sense happens at Westminster, you think it's slightly synthetic, it's slightly confected, it's a bit of an act. I don't think there was any act from Rachel Reeves about her fury, or was there any act from Jeremy Hunt, who looked like he was seething. Yeah. So let's hear from the two of them now in some pretty fierce and angry and personal exchanges. First, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves and her shadow, Jeremy Hunt.
They put party before country. Yep. And they continued to make unfunded commitment after unfunded commitment, knowing that the money was not there, resulting in the position that we have now inherited.
In her first big moment, she breaks that trust with an utterly bogus attempt to hoodwink the public about the choices she has. Over 50 times in the election, they told us they had no plans to raise taxes. Now, in a U-turn that will forever shame this Labour government, she is laying the ground to break her word. And when she does, her first budget will become the biggest betrayal in history by a new Chancellor, and working families will never forgive her.
We don't think that Jeremy Hunt is wrong. We are all expecting there to be certain tax rises in October. We've now got a date for her first budget, October the 30th, and we'll be asking her about that in a short while. But I think what you are hearing is each party trying to set out the political narrative. And those with long memories, or old people like us, will remember in 2010 when Labour lost power And there was that terrible note that Liam Byrne had left, sort of jokey but easy to understand, that said there's no money left. This became the central theme for the Conservatives under George Osborne, the Chancellor at the time, who basically said Labour has overspent. Labour has spent your money. They've taken everything from the cupboard. They've left it bare. There is nothing left. And Labour, in the middle of all this, were running their own leadership campaign with the Brothers Miliband. I think Yvette Cooper was part of that, wasn't she? Was it Ed Balls? Anyway, key figures who kind of took their eye off how this narrative was panning out and what they would then return to when they did have a leader in the autumn. And I think Reeves has been very, very sharp to this narrative and said, I'm going to start doing the same thing now before anyone else can. I'm going to say that it was much worse than we thought. And the OBR, to be fair, has backed her up, has sent a letter saying, actually, there was, a black hole that even we didn't know about and she couldn't have known about beforehand. But she gets to now write that narrative back, that they left us in an even more perilous economic place than anyone ever knew.
The difference, though, this time round, as you've alluded to, Emily, is that then Labour were in such disarray after their election defeat and who was going to be the leader, who would be the shadow chancellor, that they didn't really fight back against that narrative. And Liam Byrne, who had been the outgoing chief secretary to the Treasury, left that note. And so Labour didn't fight back. The Tories brilliantly set the narrative, set the tone, that Labour had left the cupboard bare and it was now the Tories who were going to be the ones to fix it. This time round, Jeremy Hunt is having none of it. He says, yeah, we may have lost the election, but you're not going to write the history of the Conservative government.
It's my legacy.
It's my legacy. And so he is fighting back very hard. And, and I think that an awful lot of British people, well, frankly, I'm sure an awful lot are on holiday. And I'm kind of thinking, oh, God, I'm so glad I'm not in London to listen to any of this or anywhere else in Britain. And this argument between the two of them is going to rattle on because it's important about defining the Labour government and the Conservative opposition.
Let's get to some of the policy changes that she laid out in a sort of mini statement yesterday in the Commons. She's talked about ending this universal allowance for pensioners, which we call, the winter fuel allowance. From now on, it will be means tested, which means it won't go to everyone. And she thinks she can save 1.4 billion from that. She's also going to end, or rather never implement, a cap on social care, which her party promised to bring in. It was part of the Dill-Knott reforms. Dill-Knott has been banging this drum about social care since, I think, 2012. I mean, more than a decade. And he finally thought it was going to see the light. He suggested that any one individual family should not have to pay more than £86,000 on their loved one in terms of care home costs. And we heard Wes Streeting, not so long ago, during the campaign, confirm that this was very much Labour's plan.
I've met with Andrew Dill-Knott. I think, what he set out is a framework that can also be adjusted to make it fair and more progressive when resources allow. But that is something that's already there. I'm not interested in tearing things down until we've got something better to put in its place.
So that was Wes Streeting, then Shadow Health Secretary, all of 6 weeks ago on Laura Kunsberg's show, talking about how he was going to maintain the Dill-Knott proposals. And this was Andrew Dill-Knott this morning on the Today programme, having heard Rachel Reeves scrap them.
Yeah.
I think it's a tragedy. And it's also very disappointing given what was said in the election campaign on your own programme. Wes Streeting, the now Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, said, in response to a question, we don't have any plans to change that situation. That's the certainty and stability I want.
But Rachel Reeves is basically making the argument that many of the things that the Tories promised to bring in were completely uncosted, unfunded, and there wasn't the money there. And she's also scrapped the Rwanda scheme. She thinks that they can save 800 million on that. And she said she's ditched plans for the Rishi's new A-level, the advanced standard A-level, because she said that was never funded, never costed. And she's left us with this very sort of alarm bell ringing line, which is more difficult decisions to come in October. Now, no chancellor ever had to warn the public if taxes were going to be cut, right? Never had to warn the country if there was going to be huge amounts of growth. What we're hearing is brace yourself, brace yourself. And I guess it's up to us now to try and find out where those tax increases are coming from.
Well, let's go and put that to Rachel Reeves herself, coming up. Chancellor, thanks for inviting us to the Treasury. Before we get on to the economics, I want to talk about the politics a bit, because you have accused Jeremy Hunt of lying about the state of the public finances, and you said knowingly and deliberately. You've compared it to Partygate. Is that really where you want your chancellorship to start, with a spat like this?
When I arrived at the Treasury on the 5th of July, the things that I learned in that first weekend and in the first 3 and a bit weeks in the job is truly staggering. When I arrived on the 5th of July, 3 months into the financial year, the reserve, which is set aside for emergencies, it's been spent not once, not twice, but 3 times over. No one knew that, apart from the government that's just been kicked out of office. They covered it up. They covered it up from the opposition. We're now the government. They covered it up from the House of Parliament. They covered it up from the Office of Budget Responsibility, and they covered it up from the country. And during the election, they made commitment after commitment on tax cuts and spending increases, knowing that the money was not there.
But your predecessor, Jeremy Hunt, has written to the Cabinet Secretary disputing this version, demanding an immediate answer, and saying you are in danger of bringing the civil service into disrepute if they previously signed off spending plans that were wrong.
We were in the House of Commons yesterday for 2 hours, and in those 2 hours we didn't hear a single apology, either from the Shadow Chancellor or from any of the backbench MPs. Well, since then, the Office of Budget Responsibility have launched an investigation to find out how it was the case that they were given numbers that were not accurate. And the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said that some of the data published yesterday was indeed new, and things that no one knew about during the election campaign, things that only for the first time were revealed by me yesterday in the House of Commons.
But do you think it's possible the civil service acted incorrectly?
I think that it's the government that needs to take responsibility. I'm now Chancellor of the Exchequer, and if mistakes are made in this department, I will own those mistakes, not civil servants. Civil servants don't have an external voice. Civil servants don't make decisions, ministers do. And the Chancellor, the former Chancellor, should take responsibility for his actions, and he should apologise to the country for knowingly, repeatedly and deliberately misleading us.
Let's talk about taking responsibility for your actions now. You've used this black hole to make radical changes to the Labour position. The cap on social care, which you promised 6 weeks ago, has gone. We heard Wes Streeting say that this provided certainty this side of the election. After all this time.
I don't relish any of the decisions that I had to make yesterday. But what we uncovered was that there were things that the previous government had said that they were going to do and said were funded, and they weren't. There wasn't a single penny of money behind them.
Chancellor, it's still a choice. And we thought, the British public thought, you were going to be the grown-ups in the room, that you were going to say, we'll work cross-party, we will solve the care crisis. There isn't a family in Britain that isn't prioritising the social care crisis. That's your choice.
No, and my family as well has experience of the care system, and it's broken. But what we inherited was a £22 billion black hole within this year. 3 months into the financial year, the reserve spent 3 times over.
So when Andy Dillon, who's been working on this for over a decade, says it's a tragedy, do you agree with him? It is a tragedy.
Yes, it is. But this has to be laid squarely at the feet of the Conservative Party, because if we hadn't have taken action, here's what would have happened. We would have had economic and financial instability in the same way that we experienced it when Liz Truss was Prime Minister.
Because 6 weeks ago.
And the alternative, Emily, was economic instability, with financial markets in turmoil, with interest rates going through the roof, with people's mortgages and rents going through the roof. I'm not willing to take that risk. Economic stability always has to come first. And when you're confronted with a £22 billion black hole that you're not convinced that you can service through additional borrowing, you have to make savings. And that's what I did yesterday. I don't relish those decisions.
Yeah,
they're not decisions that I wanted to make.
And everything is a priority. Tell us that something is going to be in your budget in October that talks about social care and solving that problem.
Emily, I've got to be honest that there's more difficult decisions to come.
So that's a no.
There's more difficult decisions
Nothing
to come.
on social care.
But we want to reform the social care system. We're determined to reform the social care system. But first of all, we've got to sort out the mess and fix the foundations. We've been left a terrible, terrible challenge. A £22 billion black hole, the reserves spent 3 times over in just 3 months. This is not the situation I wanted to inherit. And it's not just social care. We had to announce a number of things yesterday that I didn't want to do on winter fuel payments, on hospitals, on transport projects, because the truth is, if we hadn't have made those decisions yesterday, we risked economic instability that would put family finances in peril. I am not going to play fast and loose with the public finances. I will fix the mess that we've inherited. But am I angry about it? Yes, I am, because it was covered up during the election campaign. Promises were made with no money behind them. I will never do that. I will never treat people with such disrespect.
Just one more on the social care question, because the relative sums of money involved against the totality of government spending are tiny. Given how difficult it has been to a position where you reach consensus on what is the way forward with Dilnot's proposals, it was inconsequential amount of money, and yet this has gone.
Well, it's not inconsequential. When you've got a £22 billion black hole, you have to...
But in the overall arc of government spending...
John, but you could say that about everything. There's no easy decisions here. We had to take difficult decisions. And the problem with the social care money was that there was not a single penny of money behind it. The previous government promised it, but they had no way of delivering it. Of course, it had already been delayed twice by the previous government because they didn't have the money behind it. It was delayed again until after the election. They made promise after promise, knowing that somebody else would have to pick up the tab. We had to make difficult decisions yesterday to put our public finances and put our public spending back on a firm footing.
Let's talk about some of those decisions. You mentioned the transport projects. HS2 is in a real mess. The National Audit Office is saying that HS2 will continue to build a 7-platform station at Curzon Street, Birmingham, when just 3 platforms will be used because it's cheaper to build than to cancel. £460 million station at Birmingham will be largely unused. That is ridiculous, to be in a place where we are spending more money on cancelling stuff that won't run, that won't make us more efficient, that won't join up our northern towns, than we would be by doing it. That can't be a sensible use of taxpayers' money.
Those are the decisions by the previous government. We haven't made any changes to HS2. We didn't make any in the statement.
But you can now. You're in charge. So you can say, we're not going to waste more money on cancelling something that is actually going to cost us more, or we are going to build to Euston. You haven't told us what's going to happen, whether there's going to be trains at Euston. You can't just leave it hanging. You're in charge now. You're the chancellor.
No, and we've had 3.5 weeks, and of course we're reviewing all government spending, and we'll have a spending review in October.
Is Euston going to be used? Is that going to be part of HS2?
I very much hope so, but of course the Department for Transport and our new Transport Secretary will be looking at every penny of money to make sure we're getting good value for money for taxpayers. The previous government were not getting good value for money. They made terrible decisions, and we're now having to put those right, and we will begin to do that. But we can't turn everything around overnight. We need to grow the economy to get prosperity and wealth creation in all parts of the country, because by growing the economy we have more money both to improve living standards and also to have money for our public services.
So what about Rwanda? Are you going to the government in Kigali and saying, can we have our money back, please? Are you seeking a refund?
Well, the very first thing is we're not going to spend any more money on it. And one of the big reasons why we're in the mess we are in is that £6.4 billion more than the government anticipated we're spending on asylum accommodation costs. So we're going to get a grip of that. There'll be no more cheques handed to the Rwandan government.
But do you think that money is recoverable?
Well, look, we will do everything we can to get our money back. But it's
Are you in touch with Kigali? Are they saying, yeah?
That's for the Home Secretary. But of course we want to get our money back. We want to get our money back in a whole range of areas. This is why I've appointed a COVID corruption commissioner to get the billions of pounds spent on PPE that was never used, on contracts to friends of the donors of the Conservative Party.
Residents? Will that be resold now? It could raise you £500 million.
Look, we're looking at all of these things. We've announced yesterday the date for the budget and the date for the spending.
But wouldn't it have been better to actually get some of that money back rather than cancel some of the things that people have waited 14 years to see you do?
We had to take urgent action yesterday, but it is only the first step. Yesterday I announced £5.5 billion of savings to plug the £22 billion gap and just over £8 billion worth of savings next year. But you can see from those numbers there is still more to do to close the gap between what the previous government said they were spending and what they were actually spending. And we had to take those decisions quickly because I wanted to be open and honest and transparent with the country, but also with financial markets and also with the Office for Budget Responsibility, because we're now asking them to do a forecast ahead of the budget and the spending review. But to be able to do that, they need to have accurate numbers. And so that's why it was important that I made the announcement yesterday about the black hole, but also the first steps that we would take to fill it.
So let's talk about the future. Let's talk about, it's clear that taxes are going to have to rise. You're going to have to raise revenue, correct?
Look, I think that we will have to increase taxes in the budget, but we're
and
now
you're sticking to your. And let me just and you're sticking to your commitment of no rises in national insurance, income tax, or VAT. So presumably that means inheritance tax, pension reform, capital gains tax.
Well, let me answer both of those questions. We had in our manifesto a commitment to fiscal rules, to balance day-to-day spending through tax receipts, and by the end of the forecast period to get debt down as a share of GDP. Those are sensible fiscal rules to keep a grip of the public finances. We also made other commitments in our manifesto, not to increase national insurance, VAT or income tax for the duration.
But you've just said that taxes will go up. You've just told us that, so just give us...
Ask me about our manifesto commitments and I stick with those.
So inheritance tax, capital gains tax, pension reform are on the cards.
Well, we will have a budget on the 30th of October, and ahead of that budget we will have a forecast by the Office of Budget Responsibility, on this occasion based on accurate numbers.
Are you ruling any of those out now, as we speak?
I'm not going to write a budget or start to write a budget.
No, but you can rule things out. You've ruled out VAT rises and national insurance rises.
We had a manifesto on which we were elected 3.5 weeks ago.
So it might be there are rises in capital gains tax, in inheritance tax, and in pension reform, right?
We stick by everything in our manifesto, but I'm not going to start to write a budget. We're now beginning the process of a budget and a spending review, and a report to the House on the 30th of October.
Chancellor, can I just, on the principles of, you've made a huge play of the importance of bringing economic growth, and that is the way for this future of this country. A lot of those, and you've talked about, kind of using and leveraging private investment and investors to kind of build Great British Energy or whatever it happens to be. They are the people who are going to be hit. Those are people who are highly mobile, who can say, yeah, I just don't think the tax regime in the UK works for me anymore. I'm going to a lower tax, country.
And we will look at all of these things in the round at the budget, but our growth credentials, I don't think you can question those. In the first 72 hours in this job, I announced more reforms to the planning system than the previous government had made in 14 years to get our country building again. The next day, we created a national wealth fund to leverage in billions of pounds of private sector investment in some of the industries of the future.
Isn't that put in jeopardy if those tax changes are made to inheritance tax, to capital gains tax?
Well, we will look at all of this in the round as part of the budget and the spending review. But in just 3.5 weeks, we've reformed the planning system, created a national wealth fund, created Skills England, merging the Job Centre with the National Careers Service, and reforming our pension system to get better returns for savers and to unlock billions of pounds into productive investment in the UK economy.
Aren't those reasons to be cheerful? I mean, the funny thing is that a month into this job, less than a month, you're talking about tough choices. You're sounding like an austerity chancellor. You're cancelling things that you've said are tragic, that you care passionately about. You're embodying the austerity chancellorship of George Osborne right now.
Emily, that's just not true. Yesterday, we announced that we were accepting the recommendations of the independent pay review bodies. We're giving pay rises to millions of public sector workers, in many cases the first real terms increase in pay in a decade. So this is not a return to austerity, but it is getting a grip of the public services. And there's nothing progressive about losing control of the economy, because we saw what happened when the previous government lost control of the economy, and it was ordinary working people on low and middle incomes who lost out when mortgage rates and rents spiralled. I'm not going to play fast and loose with the public finances, because when you do so...
You've just told us that things are turning a corner, that you've got your planning reforms through, that things are looking pretty rosy.
Yes, but I've also been honest,
yourself?
Emily, but I've also been honest. It takes time to grow the economy, and we've got a £22 billion black hole, not some time in the future, but a £22 billion black hole right now in the public finances. We have to get on top of that. We have to get a grip of it. And at the same time, we need those pro-growth policies, those pro-growth reforms, so we can get out of the mess we're in. If our economy had grown at just the average rate of similar OECD economies these last 14 years, our economy today would be £140 billion bigger. That's worth £5,000 to every family in this country, and would mean we'd have an additional £58 billion to spend on our public services. So growth is absolutely essential for a successful economy and for public services that work. And that's why growth is the number one mission of this incoming government. But we cannot ignore the pressures on public spending and public finances today.
We have one very, very pressing final question.
Yeah, it was a story in the Financial Times just before the election, which was that there wasn't a female toilet near the Chancellor's office, and that there would have to be rebuilding work done to accommodate for the first female Chancellor. Has it been completed?
Well, I am the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer. The post has existed for between 800 and 1,000 years, depending on who you listen to. And I was wondering, Emily, whether you'd like to, on the way out, come and have a look at the Chancellor's toilet to see the urinal that still is in there.
You've still got a urinal?
John, Emily, I do have a urinal in my toilet. John, I'm not inviting you in, but Emily, if you would like to have a glimpse on your way out of the building, I'd be delighted to show you.
Chancellor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Obviously, there's a huge amount to unpack about some of the detail that we discussed there, Maitlis.
Yeah.
But you got to see the toilet itself, which I was banned from.
Yes.
Because it's now the ladies, but there's a ladies which has got a urinal in it.
Look, it is the most beautiful urinal I've ever seen. I mean, I don't make a study.
Why is that?
of them
Because no boys have been using it for the last 3.5 weeks.
Probably, or maybe 3.5 centuries. I don't know. It's all behind a glass panel now, and it looks beautiful, and it looks like a sort of 1920s work of art. But I think before we get too wrapped up in the urinal, and this is, I suppose, you know, emblematic, symptomatic of a big change at the top. It's the first time it's ever been led by a woman. And we heard from there a certain amount of candour, I think, from Rachel Reeves. She told us, I mean, she wouldn't spell it out, but she did tell us that taxes are going to go up. And she did tell us that the stuff that she has announced that she's scrapping, like the social care thing, is terrible, is a tragedy. You know, she agreed with Andrew Dilnot on that. And so I think you see somebody who is kind of trying to embody what she knows will be real disappointment and real frustration for a lot of people at this point, with that sort of, you know, the iron fist of Gordon Brown that she has clearly studied and heard about and learnt about and talked about with him.
The other thing that struck me, being here, sitting here in the Treasury this afternoon, is the sort of, there is a lot of goodwill towards her from Treasury staff, and I've heard it from people I know who are working at the Treasury, but there is this kind of sense of enthusiasm, not just about it being the first woman Chancellor, not just about it being a change of government for the first time in 14.5 years, where they, you know, presumably the Treasury officials get to do slightly different things for different paymasters, as it were, but just this sort of sense of optimism that things are going to change, even though the message from Rachel Reeves is pretty bleak at the moment. I mean, yeah, public sector pay rises have been announced, but it's a pretty ghastly picture she is presenting of this huge black hole that she's having to fill.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing that I can't quite reconcile is if she believes really strongly in the measures she's taking to kickstart the economy, whether it's planning reform, whether it is growth, whether it's working with the private sector, getting in investment, all the rest of it, why doesn't she back herself more rather than taking these decisions, which are clearly painful and clearly going to get a lot of people's backs up, you know, like the social care, like the things that she's talking about cancelling now? Would it not be better to give herself that room to say, we're going to reach the growth and then we're going to make them happen? In a way, she wants to show us how fiscally responsible she is more than anything else. And that's why, you know, she pushed back very hard when I compared her to, you know, the austerity chancellorship of George Osborne. And of course, she can say she's upped people's wages, she's looked at solving the junior doctors' strike and all the rest of it. And I think that's absolutely right. But she's wearing this mantle at the moment of being really hard about her choices. And I wonder if she has to.
Well, I tell you what I think that is. I think she is relying on political amnesia, that people will forget in 4 years' time the tough decisions that were taken in the first few weeks. If you're going to do the stuff, do it
all
quickly.
now. Yeah.
Get it out of the way.
Do it
blame
while
it
you're
on the
popular, when
Tories.
people are still clapping.
While you've still got the audience clapping, this is the moment of maximum power and authority to make changes. And maybe she just calculates and looks at Osborne, who was a successful chancellor, and others who have done the really ugly stuff early, and then you can do the nicer stuff later on, closer to an election, when people will feel good about you and might just vote you in again.
Good point, Sopes.
Thank you.
No, we should get out of here. We are still sitting in the Treasury. And there are people whose office we are taking up who actually want to get back to work.
The office we're in is the Chief of Staff to the Chancellor.
In the interest of growth.
We're going
to bugger off.
And the interest of us getting another interview with the Chancellor, we're off. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.